Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is the inaugural episode for the East Coast Hunt, Fish, Hike podcast. In this one, we discuss a little bit about ourselves, why we decided to start a podcast, as well as some highlights from our 2024 fishing and hunting season. We discuss some of the successes and failures from the season and provide some personal stories along the way.
That's right. Like how freshly purchased, newly fangled equipment isn't always better, and sometimes ends up with you jumping in the lake to retrieve your sunken fishing pole. So, if you think you like stories and adventures like these, make sure to follow us on Instagram at EC underscore hunt fish hike underscore pod and subscribe to the podcast to make sure that you don't miss an episode.
All right. Thanks for giving us a listen. And without further ado, let's get into the episode. Welcome to the East Coast Hunt, Fish, Hike podcast. I'm Pat Carroll, hunter, fisherman, and general outdoor enthusiast. Join me and my brother Mike as we share tactics, recount stories, and plan our upcoming outdoor adventures. Welcome to the East Coast Hunt, Fish, Hike podcast. This is a new podcast. We're exploring hunting, fishing, and hiking activities in the along the east coast of America. I'm Pat Carroll, and I'll be guiding you through our outdoor adventers. Now, we are specifically enthusiasts and not experts in these endeavors, but we're hoping to, give you some stories and show you a little bit of fun along the way. And joining me today is my co-host, Mike Carroll.
Yeah, Mike Carroll. I'm happy to be here. This is something that Pat and I have been talking about for a little while here. We want to share a little bit of our love that we have for the great outdoors, and I do think that it's important what Pat just mentioned there a second ago that we are enthusiasts, not experts. We don't claim to be hunting experts, fishing experts, or anything like that. But we grew up the both of us. We're brothers. Let's start there. We grew up in the Merrimack Valley up on the North Shore of Boston, and we lived in kind of a house that was kind of set back in the woods and kind of experienced our fair share, I guess you can say, of outdoor adventures. And I think kind of growing up with that in our blood, so to speak, led us to appreciate the outdoors as we kind of grew into our young adulthood and into adulthood. Now at this point, we've both got our own families, and we're kind of continuing along with that love of the great outdoors. So again, we're not experts. We're not trying to sell any products. We're not trying to fill your wall with different fish on plaques or anything like that. But we do like the outdoors. So we're hoping to kind of share some of the stories that we've had along the way, as well as just talk about something that the both of us love.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I want to add to that is that, not being an expert doesn't mean you can't love it, right? I mean, I think both you and I love the outdoors and we love doing these things. And just because we're not, mounting huge bucks or tons of fish, putting tons of fish in the boat doesn't necessarily mean that we don't love it just as much as the guy who is, right? So I think it's important. It's important to show that too, because not everybody is going to be the superstar at this, right? So there's way more normal people than there are experts, right? So,
absolutely.
And that's huge to know.
I think another thing kind of going off of that is like, you don't have to be ashamed of that. You don't have to be ashamed of the fact that you're hunting with like a bow and arrow set that you've had since you were 25 years old. You don't have to be ashamed of the fact that you went out fishing 3 or 4 times and only caught one fish or didn't catch any fish. It's something that I know from talking with you, Pat, it's something that we do because we love doing it. And you don't have to be ashamed at whatever level it is that you're kind of making your way into it. You could it's kind of like people always say about golf, like you can always get into it at any age. It's kind of like the outdoors and outdoor sports and hunting and fishing. It's something that you can do and you can start into at any level, and that's part of what makes it awesome. That's part of what makes it so great. So yeah, I'm really excited to share kind of some of our stories and yeah,
Ab-
and kind of share some of that enthusiasm.
Absolutely. So I guess before we get into this, this session, I think we should do a little bit of introduction about who we
Hmm.
are.
Yep.
So I'll go first. My name's Pat Carroll. I live up in the North Shore, Massachusetts. I work as a bioprocess engineer, which is a fancy title for somebody who helps make drugs.
Oh, so that's what you do.
Yeah, right. As far as hobbies go, I mean, I love, the outdoors. I love hunting, fishing, any opportunity I can get outside, hiking in the summer, as well as, dabble in guitar. Those are most of the hobbies that I experience. And then also, I have a lovely wife and two young daughters.
Mm-hmm.
Mike, what about you? You want to do your intro?
Yeah. So I am Mike Carroll. I am originally born and raised in the North Shore of Boston, up in the Merrimack Valley. I am a teacher during kind of like my professional life during the day. I wear a lot of hats at the school where I teach. I teach at a private Catholic school, so I'm the head seventh grade football coach. I'm the head seventh and eighth grade swimming and diving coach. Both Pat and I, it might be something that we get into in future episodes. But Pat was a phenomenal swimmer and track runner and athlete when he was in high school. Went on to do it in college. My athletic pursuits were a little bit shorter lived than Pat's were, but I still love athletics. So I made my way into kind of like the coaching realm. So I do a lot of coaching as well. Particularly I used to coach track as well, but now it's football, swimming, and I help out with the varsity diving team as well at the private school where I teach. Hobbies are kind of vast. I do a lot of writing, and if you're coming here from the Required Reading podcast, or if you've heard me talking a little bit about this new podcast that Pat and I are doing on the Required Reading podcast, it's because the writing is a big part of me as well, and reading is a big part of me as well. I'm in the process of writing a fourth book. I'm doing a lot of work with publishers to try and get myself published, and reaching out to agents and editors, and it's a kind of a trudge in that regard. And if you're here from Required Reading, you can I'm sure remember some of those things that I've been talking about. I've had some works published. It's some short stories. A lot of it is kind of like fantasy and based off of epic poetry, or kind of with roots in epic poetry. Pat is kind of my sounding board for a lot of those stories. But I do a lot of writing, and so that's and I do a lot of storytelling too, which is part of why I'm so excited about this podcast too, is because there's certainly an aspect of storytelling that's part of it. Similar to what Pat was saying, though, music, definitely the outdoors. I find that over the course of the last probably 4 or 5 years, the few personal days that I get as a teacher, I spend wanting to get out on the water and go fishing, particularly. I do a lot more fishing than hunting. In fact, I have done very little hunting. So my experience on the fishing side of things is going to be kind of more what it is that I'm bringing to the table. But I like that too, because I get to hear a lot of Pat's stories, and something that Pat's really passionate about, which is hunting. Beowulf, let's just go there. I love the epic poem of Beowulf. It's the source of a lot of the writing that I do. I'll chat with you for hours and days, though. That's probably more akin to the Required Reading podcast, but nevertheless, that's kind of podcasting, I guess you could
Yeah.
say, is something else that I do. It's another hobby that I have. I am down in Atlanta, Georgia, whereas Pat's still up on the North Shore. I moved down to Atlanta, Georgia after graduating from Boston College, and my family, I got married to my lovely wife, and we have two kids as well, a 3-year-old, and we've got a 5, 6 month old at this
Ooh,
point.
busy,
So
busy.
we've got. Yes. Sleep is at a premium, and we are very busy. But yeah, so it's a little bit about myself. and a little bit of what it is that I'll be bringing to the table. So there you go.
Very nice. You certainly do wear a lot of hats, Mike.
Yes.
So,
Renaissance man. Yeah.
exactly.
Mhm.
So I figured we could go a quick update on any recent activities we've had. I mean, around here, or at least what time of recording, it's kind of the middle of the winter. So Massachusetts, as
Mm.
far as options for seasons, I mean, technically there's a ice fishing going on right now, but there hasn't been super good ice where I am right now. It
Mhm.
hasn't been a huge option, but I did have a chance to get outside and do a little bit of sledding with the kiddos
Awesome.
over Christmas. We we went up to my wife's family's in Maine, so we went up there, and right around Christmas time they got about 4 inches of snow, which is not really a whole lot of snow, but it was enough for us to get out there and go sledding, which was great. So we bundled up the little ones, got the sleds out there, and first day, they had a great time sledding down the hill, and the second day they wanted to go sledding, and they did a couple runs, and they said, getting a little bored. And you know what I said? I said, this is the time for Dad to shine. So I grabbed a handful of sticks from the woods and stuck them vertically in the snow and made a nice little slalom course for them.
There you
So then
go.
they were going in and out of
Perfect.
the sticks, trying to figure out if they could beat the best time of the day. And let me tell you, one of the little ones was definitely faster than Dad going down the hill. So, but it was a lot of fun.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, and I mean that's another aspect of things that we can get into. Let me just start by saying, Pat, you don't need 4 inches in order to be able to go sledding, because we down in Georgia, we get snow every now and then. It's not like it's an impossibility, but over the course of the last 2 weeks, we got snow, and then we had rain. We had like another kind of like flurry. So 2 weeks ago we had about like an inch of snow, which doesn't sound like much, I'm sure, to a lot of our listeners. But an inch of snow in Georgia is quite a bit. The city shuts down, especially you might remember a lot of the pictures that were taken at this point. It was like 12 years ago or 13 years ago, of all of those pictures that were put right alongside like pictures from The Walking Dead, and it was like the city of Atlanta with our 1 inch of snow that was like completely and utterly shut down. And maybe that's a story for another podcast. Is where I was during snowpocalypse down in Atlanta. But we still get a hard time from people up north who are like really like 1 inch and it shut down the
Yeah,
city
we
that
we
much.
call that a dusting up here.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But if you consider the fact that back in that time, it was rumored. I do not now don't fact check me on this, but it was rumored that at the time we had exactly one snowplow in the city of Atlanta. And if you can consider the fact that up north you have salt and you have like the sand trucks and you've got multiple plows. If you've got one plow in the city of Atlanta, you can imagine why like 1 inch of snow. And then it didn't get above 32 degrees for like a week and a half afterwards. So I mean, we were on lockdown. This was of course 13 years ago, but I think we learned from that and we got more plows. So kudos to Atlanta for that. But we had 2 weeks ago we had like an inch of snow, and it was so fun because all the kids in the neighborhood like were out in the streets like throwing snowballs. There were like we had a couple of the houses around us were like making snowmen, and some people had never made snowmen before. So I got to once again like it was Dad's time to shine, right? It's Boston Mike's time to shine. So I like was able to show like the kids in the neighborhoods like, no, you don't just pack it into a circle, you actually like roll it, and that's how you make the snowman. But I'm very proud of the snowman. I took a picture of it, and we had like I got one of the BC scarves that I have, and I had like a hat and everything that I put on it, which was pretty cool. So we made some snowmen. We've got a you can't see it right now because it's too dark in our backyard, but we've got maybe a 4.5 foot like little, to call it a hill is an insult to hills. It's like it's barely even a bump. But we've got like our like little rose garden that's in the back, and then we've got this like tiny little hill. And so we got for our 3-year-old we got a like a Rubbermaid lid, and she was thrilled to just be able to like slide down our like
That's
4.5.
awesome.
Now this is nothing compared to what you guys had up north, I'm sure, up in Maine, but we had our fair share of our little fun with the snow that had been coming in. So
Wow,
that's a
that's
little bit of an
amazing.
update for our stuff and for our outdoors here. So
Absolutely. All right. So next, we're gonna get into our kind of season reviews here. So this is coming up in the beginning of 2025. So we want to take a second to look back at our 2024 season. I'm
Yep,
gonna
I
go
love it.
over my hunting season and give you guys the highs and the lows, and then and Mike's gonna go through some of his fishing endeavors from last year.
Yeah.
So it
Yep.
should be pretty exciting. So I guess to start off, I'm still a very beginner hunter. I've only been, really actively hunting for the last like 5 years or so. But in that time, I do a lot of listening to podcasts, trying to better myself. And, I really do enjoy the process and like the hunt itself. I would say that I don't get as much time in the woods as I'd like. I usually get a couple days in the spring to kind of take a look at the woods. I usually get like a day in the summer to get out there, and then I'll usually only get like 5 or 6 days through the hunting season in order to be active and be in the woods and trying to accomplish that goal. Um, and generally speaking, my strategy tends to be I'll take instead of taking all 5 days, in a row, I like to kind of spread them out over the course of the season. That way, I get a couple,
Yeah.
early season days, some stuff right in the middle of the rut, and then some stuff towards the end of the season too, kind of spreading out the fun and the excitement for me. And I will
Yeah.
say, Mike is kind of bringing along that beginner's enthusiasm, that beginner's ear for this. So he's going to
Yeah.
be listening and asking those questions along that really that the true beginner would really
Yeah.
have not a lot of answers to. So
Mhm.
which is
For sure.
great. So moving into the beginning of the 2024 season, usually at the beginning of this end of the previous season, I'll pull my trail cam cards, take a look
Mhm.
at what they look like, and see what they have as far as if I'm seeing any big deer. And then what I usually do with that data is I'll take the camera, I'll see what the date that the deer was on there, I'll put it in a
Mhm.
spreadsheet, and I take the deer, like I'll if there was a deer there, and then I'll see, okay, go back to a website called Weather Underground, and it'll actually tell you what the wind was that day and the temperature was that day, and I'll jot down what that specific wind direction was for that deer at the time that they were in front of the camera. And I do
Mhm.
this for all the deer that go across any of the cameras that I have in the woods. Now, I only have about 5 of those, but even with having 5 cameras with a whole extended period of time in the woods, you get a lot of pictures, and it ends up being a decent amount of data. And then I use that data in order to try and pinpoint when and where I'm going to be in the woods the following year.
Mhm.
So this time, I got some pretty good deer on there. Some that I would be they're definitely considered trophy deer for this area, that's for sure. But
Okay, cool.
the idea of being able to get in front of one, obviously a challenge, right? You're talking about this deer may have walked in front of this camera 2 times, but they did that over the course of an entire year, right? So it's like you would have
Right.
had to have been standing at that exact spot at that time in order
Mhm.
to have an opportunity with them. And then you
Right.
take into the fact that you need to be in the hunting season. Well, then gets even more challenging,
Right.
right?
Mhm.
But the good news was there were deer on the cameras. I was able to kind of get an idea of where I wanted to set up, and then we go from there. Finally got an opportunity to get the next year's trail cameras in the woods around July, which is a little later than
Mhm.
I usually put them in. I'll usually try and get them in around end of May, early June, just because you know, the later into the summer you get, the more like woods have grown up. So like the weeds are bigger,
Yeah.
everything has lots of leaves on the trees, which makes it a little bit more challenging in order to get those trail cameras on the trees and exactly how you want them. In like late May, which I find to be like a great time, it's like there's
Mhm.
still enough room to like walk around. Everything isn't like super grown up, but you still have an idea of kind of like where you want to put things, which is super
Yeah.
helpful.
So let me just stop you for a second. Again, super novice here, but when you're talking about kind of like cross-checking and making a spreadsheet with like the deer that you're seeing on the camera, when it is that they were there, and then the wind direction, I'm assuming that that means that you are trying to place your potential tree stand in a location where the wind isn't going to be blowing your scent towards the deer. Would that be correct?
Yeah, to some degree. I mean, yes and no. So you always got to kind of try and find that middle ground, right? So I would say you clearly you don't want your scent to be blowing like directly at the deer, right? But at
Hmm.
the same time, the deer is always going to try and use the wind to their advantage. So in most instances, the deer is going to be walking into the like with their nose in the wood into the wind.
Hmm.
So if you're always going to put your stand in a situation where you're going to have the best advantage on the deer may not walk there because
Yeah.
they know that they don't have the advantage there. So what you really want to
Yeah.
try and do is try and find like right on the edge, that area where your wind isn't maybe not perfect. You might like there's
Okay.
an opportunity for it to maybe blow to the deer. But most times it's going to be right on the edge and the deer isn't going to wind you most of the time, or if they would, it would be like right as the deer is like walking into your shooting lane. So that's kind of where you're kind of trying to
Okay.
tiptoe that edge to make sure that it's not going to be, it's like close, but not too close, I guess. But yeah,
Yeah.
great
Okay.
question.
Yeah. That no, that totally makes sense. Is there anything else that you're trying to kind of like in kind of like the strategy of setting up where your tree stand is going to end up going? Is there anything else that you're taking into consideration in addition to wind, or is wind kind of it?
It's definitely wind. I mean, the wind is probably what is going to impact the deer the most as far as when they're moving. That and terrain features. So there's a handful of different terrain features that you'll see in the woods. Obviously, you know what a hill is, right? And there's obviously
Yeah.
valleys, so it's like top of the hill and then like the bottom of the hill. But there is also a number of other things that are also super helpful when working in the deer woods. One thing is like saddles. So a saddle is
Mm-hmm.
if you're looking at a hill, right? And it's like kind of like a longer hill. If there's a point that's like a little bit lower, right? So you imagine like what a saddle looks like. That low point
Yeah.
in the hill is going to be the easiest for a deer to cross if they're trying to cross from one side of the hill to the other, right? The deer is going to try and
Right.
utilize the easiest path. So they'll a lot of the times they'll use those saddles in order to go over those hills because it's, easier walking for them. So that's a point that you can kind of pinpoint if you're looking on a
Yeah. That makes
topographical
perfect sense.
map. That saddle is a nice place to check, like, put a pin on it and then you can take a look at it later. Additional to that, there's
Hmm.
also pinch points, right? So if like two hills come like really close together and make a really kind of narrow,
Hmm.
thin point where you would kind of funnel your deer activity, that's a place where, another place to look. As well as, if you're looking at a hill and it looks like it's like relatively, let's say, steep, and then at some point in the middle of the hill it kind of levels off and then it gets steep again, that's called a bench. And the deer will walk along
Hmm.
those benches on the side of the hills, and it gives them a couple of advantages. One, it's easier walking because they're not walking on a slope, and two, depending on what the wind looks like, they'll either catch the wind from the bottom, and the predator won't be able to see them because they're on the bench, or likewise on the other side, if the wind's coming over the top of the hill, it's a place where they can kind of smell what's on top without having to actually be there, which is hugely helpful for the
Gotcha.
deer as well. So those are kind of
Yeah.
some of the
No, that
terrain features you're looking for as well in the
yeah.
woods.
Does then kind of like again, sorry, like total and complete novice here, but then it is like the shot that ultimately you're going to end up taking. Does that play a role as well? Because and I know that this is something that we haven't brought up on the podcast either, but you're doing, correct me if I'm wrong, you're doing a lot more bow hunting, exclusively bow hunting, or you're doing a lot more bow hunting. So there in my mind there would certainly come into effect like the range that you're able to shoot if you're shooting trying to like if your bow range is only limited, like where you would want to be able to give yourself an advantageous shot. I'm thinking about like when it comes to fishing, like you need to be within your perimeter of where you can cast if you're casting and retrieving, and so that's going to be a lot more limited dependent upon if you're using a bow versus a rifle. So does like your angle of the shot or your clarity of a shot play any factor in the tree stand location either?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that is another critical piece to tree stand area selection, and once again it kind of falls into that double-edged sword category. So you want it to be thick enough that the deer feel comfortable. Like deer are
Right.
generally speaking not going to just wander out into the middle of a field and let you shoot them, right? I
Hmm.
mean, they're going to try and either, if they're not going to be totally in the cover and in like thick briar patches or really like thick, bushes and stuff like that, they're going to be standing right along the edge of it. And
Okay.
realistically, they're not going to be moving outside of that unless they're trying to either get from point A to point B, or there's a reason. Like if there's a ton of acorns in the middle of the middle of a path or something like that, yeah, they'll move out of the way for that.
Yeah.
But so you want it to be, generally speaking, close to cover, but you want to be ideally have those areas that are within that cover that you can shoot into, right? We usually call
Yeah.
those shooting lanes. And there's a couple of different ways you can either one have them or have an idea of where they're going to be when you set up your tree stand, or two, if you're on area that you can make shooting lanes, if you're on private land or area that you own yourself, you can cut down like trees or
Mm-hmm.
chop off branches in order to kind of allow you to have better opportunities in shooting into thick cover.
Okay.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
that
those are
makes sense.
kind of the ideas around that.
Okay,
But yeah,
cool. Yeah,
good
so
questions.
back to some of your recap here.
Yeah,
Not to
absolutely.
interrupt too
So
much.
no, that's the whole point of it. So yeah, I got some good camera data, started compiling that, and got an idea of what I wanted the season to look like. So generally speaking, I'm mostly hunting, public land, larger pieces that are kind of hilly, but they're not that hilly. I mean, they're not even by New England standards are they really hilly. I would say the highest hill is probably only about 50 feet. It's not huge,
Right.
but I mean, you look at the topographical map and it doesn't look like there's a lot of elevation changes, but when you step foot on there are tons of like little 10-foot, 20-foot, 5-foot differences in the
Mhm.
terrain that make all the difference to the deer. I mean, you're talking about like a deer stands maybe like 3 or 4 feet high. So if a 10-foot difference from where I'm standing to like, behind a hill, you'll never see a deer. And
Right.
and
Mhm.
those type of differences are all over the place. So it's like
Mhm.
really good terrain to find big deer. It's
Yeah.
also super thick, and it also
Mhm.
sits right next to a marsh. So
Okay.
all those things together allow it to be like really good habitat for deer. Like basically, they have bedding everywhere they want to be. They have
Yeah.
food everywhere. There's really no. I mean, the good news is that it provides a lot of things that deer need. The bad news, it makes it really hard to pin them down because they
Right.
can pretty much be anywhere and be a happy deer. So, which is
Yeah.
a challenge. But the good news is I have enough, camera data to indicate that there is also some very big deer in there, which is what kind of
Yeah.
keeps me going back.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we
No, that
move
makes sense.
exactly. But we move into I had a 5 or 6 sits, full days that I took off from work in order to do some hunting
Mhm.
this season. I started off in early October. I always try and get one day in like the first week of archery season. I feel like it's like the perfect kind of, early season setup. It's still kind of nice weather. The deer haven't been pressured at all. And, I like to, it's exciting to start getting into the woods. And usually that's like the first week in October.
Yeah.
Um, this year, I was sitting in a couple stands that I'd utilized before, but I plan to utilize different entry routes. So the theory here is that, previously I'd been walking into the stand one way and it had been moderate success, but I thought that maybe if I utilized a different route with with a different wind, then it might be more beneficial. So I was trying that out. It seemed to work okay. I mean, didn't didn't see any less deer than I usually do, so I guess it's not
Yeah.
really that different. In the morning, I had a relatively normal sit and a normal stand. Didn't really see anything. And then in the afternoon, I've been utilizing a tree saddle recently for some of my sits that are a little bit less predictable. If I want to do a little bit of walking around and try and find a tree for that day that I don't have to pre-set up, I'll use the tree saddle. And Mike, you're
Okay.
probably going
You
to
gotta
say,
explain what that
what
is.
is a
What's
tree
that?
saddle?
Yes. Yes, please.
So a tree stand, right? You
Yeah.
generally
Mhm.
speaking, there's some sort of ladder mechanism to get up the tree, right? In my case, I utilize climbing sticks. So they're kind of like if you envision like a piece of a ladder that you more or less strap to a tree. You strap like 3 of them on there, and you'll get
Yep.
15 feet up in the air, and then you have a little platform in order to sit on, and then that's your tree stand.
Yep.
Tree saddle is a little bit more like kind of like a rock climbing harness, with a little bit more, I guess, cushioning, for lack of a better word. So basically, the idea is that you use those same climbing sticks, you climb up to your tree height, and basically you tie a rope around the tree and connect it to your tree saddle or your harness, kind of rock climbing harness type deal, with like a tiny little platform where your feet go, and then you just kind of sit back on your harness, and you sit like that. So it's a little bit less weight to carry into the woods, which is nice. It's a little easier setting up, which is nice, but you have to kind of set it up and take it down every time you use it. So that's kind of the disadvantage, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, makes sense.
But a little bit more flexibility if you're going to, say, walk into an area that you don't necessarily know what tree you're going to set up on, and you plan to set up there without kind of knowing ahead of time,
Yeah.
which is cool. I picked that up a couple years ago, and it's been pretty fun to test out. But yeah, didn't see anything the first sit. I will say that it was warm. I would say unseasonably warm for the Massachusetts area. We were talking like mid-70s,
Yeah.
which for October is a little bit hot. Moving into the second sit, I kind of let October kind of go through. I didn't do a lot more hunting in October, so the next opportunity I had was in the first week of November. Now, first week in November for the deer hunters out there is, one of the premier times to be in the woods. It's right in the beginning of the rut, with the breeding season for deer. So the bucks start to get a little bit crazy. All the deer are kind of running around all over the place, and it helps, helps to get the deer on their feet and gives you a better opportunity to see deer in the woods.
Presumably, they're throwing caution a little bit more to the
Yes,
wind, I would imagine,
exactly. That is
right?
exactly what's happening. Unfortunately, November 4th of this past year was also in the mid 70s. And in
Gosh.
November, that's like basically a heat wave. And these deer are pretty much wearing their winter coats all the time. So if you can imagine being in your winter coat in the middle of a heat wave, there's not a whole lot of running around that you would want to be doing. And the deer are pretty much the same way. So daylight activity for deer on that day was pretty limited. I got up in the early in the morning. I tend to try and get into the woods, before 5 o'clock. Get up into a tree, and didn't really see anything because it was so hot. I just decided, I'll take the afternoon. I'll scout around, see if I can find any good sign, any new areas that I want to track down. And then I got into a saddle in the afternoon just to see, maybe I'll get lucky. Turns out, didn't get lucky. So It was what it was. But I got to explore a little bit more area, and that was a lessons learned that I had from last year. So last year we had a number of hot days when I was in the woods as well, and didn't end up seeing anything. So I at least this time decided, if it's hot, hit the ground, walk around, see if you can find anything or get the deer moving at all. And that at least in that opportunity, you're either learning something, or you got an opportunity to see something that you wouldn't necessarily if it was just bedded down all day. Moving into the third sit, so moving like the third sit is like pretty much halfway through. I only take about 5 or 6 days for the year, so now we're starting to get into, prime time, do or die times, right? So it's starting to get a little bit more stressful, but we're making it happen. And the third sit was going to be perfect. It had a perfect wind for one of my stands, so I said I will do an all-day sit. I will get there before dark. I will get up in that stand. I will sit there all day until the sun goes down and I can't hunt anymore. And I did that, and I saw nothing. Not a single deer, a lot of squirrels, a lot of red squirrels chittering away. But it's always a little bit disheartening when you think you have a perfect wind and you don't see anything. It's a little bit challenging.
Gosh. And I'll talk a little bit more about that with fishing too, but there's so many similarities there where it's like, gosh, this area is perfect. Like there is no reason why there should not be fish like jumping on my line right now. They should be jumping into my kayak. They should be jumping into my boat, and they're just not doing it, and it's like it makes you like question, like, gosh, I thought I had this scouted out perfectly, and then all of a sudden you get nothing, and it can be so disheartening.
Oh
So
yeah.
kudos to you for sticking with it.
Absolutely. Well, and it's always that question, right? Is it something I did, or did the deer get out of its bed and decide to go left instead of right that day, right? Like
Right.
it's so
Yeah.
tough to tell if it's part of your process or just, bad luck. But either
Yeah.
way, we persevered forward. We kept things going and, moved on to the fourth sit. So moving on to the fourth sit, we're starting to get close to Thanksgiving time. Still a prime time for hunting, but the rut is starting to wind down a little bit. So you're going to
Mhm.
see less of that kind of random activity and a little bit more, of what the deer usually do, which is a lot of, morning or night activity almost exclusively. So this fourth sit, in the morning, started off as a kind of a rainy day, with a pretty good wind for the stand I was utilizing. Which rain isn't necessarily bad, especially if it's kind of like a little bit of a rain.
Mhm.
It just kind of quiets down the woods. All the leaves, instead of being super crinkly and crunchy, they get a little bit wet and allows you to walk in a little
Mhm.
bit quieter. The downside is that it also makes it easier for the deer to kind of sneak up on you. You
Yeah.
can't hear them either. So you got to
Yeah.
make sure you got good eyes looking around. So I took this sit in the morning. It was a stand that I've utilized before, right near one of my trail cameras. And, I'm sitting there and I look to my right and I see a little bit of movement. I'm like, ooh, that could have been a deer. So I take a look a little bit harder, kind of focus in on kind of down by the area where my trail camera is, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, that is a deer. Little doe was walking by, staying in the thick cover, just a little bit too far away from me to be able to get a shot. Probably about 50 yards in some thick
Mhm.
cover, which for a bow hunter, I'm trying to look for a shot that's inside of 20 yards. That would be ideal. I can
Yeah.
push it out to like 30, 35, but anything after that is going to be kind
Yeah.
of a
It's
real challenge.
diminishing returns.
Well,
Yeah.
especially,
Mhm.
you're talking about, there's sticks there, the deer
Yeah.
can move, there's so many different variables that can impact your arrow flight once it leaves your bow
Yeah.
that you can't control, that you got to be able to control the ones you can, right? And one of those is, when you take that shot. So I'm
Yeah.
generally looking for something a little bit closer in.
Yeah.
50 was gonna be quite a poke, especially with all the cover and thick stuff that this deer was
Yeah.
behind.
Yeah,
But
for sure.
I have a grunt tube, a little tube to make a deer noise, more or less. And
Yeah.
so sometimes I'll utilize the grunt tube in order to call in deer, or I'll if there's a deer that's kind of far away, give them a grunt and see if they'll kind of turn their head and come this way. I've used it before, and I'll give them a call and they've come a little bit closer. Sometimes they just, most of the time it'll either be they ignore it or they'll, pick their head up, look around, and maybe come in a little closer. So I was like, I'll give him a
Yeah.
grunt. He's walking away anyway. So I give
Mhm.
it a little, brrrr. That's what a grunt
Yeah.
call sounds like. Um, and the deer kind of
That's
like
awesome.
picks up his head, looks around, and then puts it down and keeps walking away. So like,
Yeah.
well,
Mhm.
we tried. Nothing was going to happen.
She noticed me though. That's
She
the
did. She
that's
heard it. She looked around and then said, "Nah, I don't want to go over there." So,
yeah.
you do what you can. But I saw a deer, so that was ultimately a goal of mine. Was
Mhm.
let's just get a deer sighted this year, and that was a win.
Yeah. Mhm.
That particular spot wasn't going to be good with that wind for the afternoon, so I decided to get down out of that stand and do kind of like a scouting walk around. Kind of
Mhm.
walked a little bit in the area that doe was going, but also a little bit closer to the marsh that I knew had some areas that I wanted to check out. And when I got down to the marsh, there was some really good sign, like lots of rubs, lots of scrapes all along that marsh line. And I was like, oh
Yeah,
well,
so sorry
no,
to
absolutely,
like
please.
to ask about sign. So you've brought up sign a couple of times now, and I'm guessing that's kind of like sign that deer have been there. What exactly are you looking for in terms of sign? You mentioned rubs. You mentioned are you looking for what exactly is it that you're looking for?
Absolutely. So a lot of the times, there's a handful of things that you're looking for when you're looking for the fact that a deer has been in the area. One is going to be, relatively basic things like your deer tracks, deer footprints in mud or snow or anywhere you could see a deer footprint, and
Right.
like deer poop, right? That's obviously a good one because that
Mhm.
means that a deer was there in a time relatively recently because they had poop and it hasn't like disintegrated, basically, right?
Right. Mhm.
Then there's also a couple other major signs that are useful when you're specifically looking for bucks. One of those is rubs. So
Mhm.
when a buck, generally during the rut or as you're getting closer to the rut, the deer breeding period, a buck's testosterone spikes, right? So they
Mhm.
suddenly get this urge to fight, and they
Mhm.
start to get frustrated, and they rub their antlers on trees and like
Mhm.
small saplings and stuff. And when they do that, they rub off some of the bark there, and that's called a
Yeah.
rub. And it has
Okay.
like a little bit of a section on that tree that's rubbed bare to the wood and doesn't have the
Mhm.
bark there. Generally, you can the bigger the tree usually means the bigger deer has been rubbing it, but not
Okay.
necessarily. Some small deer will rub big trees too. It's not a rule per se, but it is kind of how people generally think of it. And then the other
Right.
thing is scrapes. Now, scrapes are hugely important in the deer world because that's how deer communicate. Generally speaking, a doe will pee in a scrape, and that gives the other deer some information about that doe, how close they are to going into heat, how close they are to being ready to breed. And bucks will do basically the same thing. Bucks will utilize those scrapes as saying, like,
Yeah.
this is my territory, this is where this is my area, don't come over here if you're another buck. Then another buck will come over there and be like, no, it's not your area, it's my area. So these are kind of like their stomping grounds, ways
Right.
that deer communicate with one another to say that they are in the area. So if when you start seeing rubs and scrapes, those are areas that deer are going to be coming to generally more than once. You're not going to usually not just going to have a scrape that a deer goes to one time and then they kind of leave it alone. Usually they'll come and visit it a handful of times. And it might not be like every day. Maybe it's like once every 5 days. Maybe it's once every 10 days. Or it could be something that they're going every other day, right? You never really can tell.
Right. Mhm.
But
But that makes sense why it would be a good sign that there's been deer that have been present in the area.
oh
That's
yeah,
a good thing to be looking for.
absolutely. And then when I was walking along the marsh area, I saw like a line of probably 5 or 6 different scrapes there,
Mhm.
which is telling me that they've been utilizing that area quite a bit during this
Mhm.
season. And something like a scrape, it's not necessarily gonna you know um, as the season goes on, it's going to get covered with leaves and sticks like that. If they're still looking
Right.
open, that generally means that they're still being used, which is, really good
Yeah.
information for a hunter to know that, the deer are still in the area. So
Right.
using that information, I was said, aha, I will try and utilize this spot for the next time I hunt. Utilizing
Yeah.
my saddle, I get I
Yeah.
don't have to carry like a big tree stand in the woods. I can use my saddle. I got my climbing sticks. I'll make this happen. So, uh, that brings me to my 5th sit of the year. Yeah, so for the 5th sit, I decided to utilize the information I had seen from the 4th sit, with
Mhm.
all, right around that marshy area, and creep my way into a new spot. So I got my saddle on my back, and it's an area that I haven't been to before. Specifically, I haven't got to it at early in the morning. So we're talking 5 o'clock
Mhm.
in the morning. There's no light. I'm not
Oh,
walking on
man.
like a path,
That
right? So
is
usually
early.
this is relatively new. I walk in the mornings relatively frequently, but usually it's the spots that I'm familiar with. So it's like I know kind of, okay, I got to walk, this distance until I get to this tree, and then I kind of take this path, which is really just like a game trail, but there's at least not that many trees in the way. I know I'm not going to walk right into like a briar patch. Um, but when I'm going to a new area, I mean, yes, I'll use the mapping apps. I have a pin that's dropped on the map, and I have a location of where I am. But as far as knowing, if there's any blowdowns or large, bramble bushes in the way, I got no idea. So basically ended up
Right.
walking through, finding my way. I did make it to the area I wanted, which was great, but I did have to like crawl
Sure.
hands and knees for probably about 50 yards
Oh my
through
gosh.
like a bush in order to get there, which, was, kind of fun at the time, I guess, but it was
Yeah.
probably not doing a great job as far as not making a lot of noise.
Hmm.
But I got there, I got set up. It was good. Area looked nice. I sat there for a little bit. I was gonna sit there in the morning and go someplace else for the afternoon, just for the winds. But yeah, I got that one. I got set up and waited, and right around 7:30 or so, I heard a deer blow from behind me, which was the
Mm.
direction that my wind was coming from. So, or the direction my wind was going to. So I suspect a deer was making their way towards me using the wind to their advantage and happened to
Yeah.
pick up my scent either from the wind blowing their direction or from any number of the bushes that I crashed into on my way to the tree.
Yes.
So,
Oh
so
gosh.
either way, it was kind of like a
Yeah.
win lose in the sense that yes, there was a deer nearby, so that was nice. But
Yeah.
no, I did
Mhm.
not get to see the deer because he
Yeah.
blew before I had that opportunity. Sat,
So a deer blowing, that's like them like snorting, huffing,
yeah,
I'm assuming.
that's pretty much exactly
And
what it is.
yeah. And
Basically
so
what'll happen.
that
Yeah, I was gonna say basically what'll happen is, if a deer, and it's not all the time, and it's not always necessarily bad, but usually if a deer does smell you or they're alerted to your presence, they'll make a kind of a kind of noise,
yeah.
right? And
Mhm.
that's them kind of trying to warn other deer in the area, like, hey, something's kind of not right here. So yeah,
Yeah.
that's the sound that I heard, which was, generally
Gotcha.
not what you're looking to hear. Now, sometimes the deer
Yeah.
will do
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
and they won't necessarily bug out of there. They'll just kind of
Yeah.
be like, hey, something's not right, but they'll still stick around. This time, not really the case. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, no, I sat there for a little bit longer. Got around, I think, 10 o'clock. Another hunter walked by, and after they walked, I don't think they saw me, but I was just kind of hanging in a tree while they were, it's gun season, so everybody's wearing bright orange, right? Like, he was
Yeah.
probably about 150 yards away, kind of walking down a
Okay.
game trail. But I didn't end up seeing him, and nor did he kick anything my way. And after he walked through, I was like, I'm not going to really see anything for the rest of the morning, so I'll move to my afternoon spot, which I didn't see anything there either. So
Yeah.
what can you do? I did take one last opportunity to get in the woods. Had a morning on a weekend that I had an opportunity to get in. It was early December, and it was cold. Real cold. We're talking feels like 11 cold. We're
Yeah.
talking,
Mhm.
I filled my water bottle up before I got in the car, climbed up into the tree, and by the time I went to take a sip of water, it was frozen
It
cold.
was
Like,
frozen.
I had a frozen water bottle. But nonetheless, it was great to get in the woods. I know I had all my layers on. I was relatively cozy for being outside for 5 or 6 hours in 11-degree weather. It's not something that normal people generally do, but it wasn't too bad. So good to get out there, but ultimately didn't end up seeing anything, which kind of
Yeah.
makes sense. Moving into December, the deer activity starts to dwindle down a little bit, and especially on those cold mornings, they're going to be a little bit less active as well. So,
Mhm.
tends to be the case. But yeah, that was my season. Not quite as eventful as I would have hoped, but I did have
Yeah.
some opportunities to see some deer, learn some things about my hunting strategy, my hunting setup, what works for me, what doesn't, and a couple of takeaways for me. One is that warm hunts in October and early November, generally speaking, are not great. They don't tend to work particularly well.
Mhm.
But you do what you can. You try and walk around and find new areas, which I think was beneficial for me. And I'm really excited about that new kind of marshy spot moving into next year.
Yeah.
I think that in that first 2 weeks in November, I think that's the time where a lot of the deer activity is going to be happening there. And I think
Yeah.
that moving forward, if I can get a sit in there in that early November time frame, I think it's going to be real lucrative. There was a lot of really good rubs in that area, indicating that I think that there's a big buck back
Yeah.
there. So
Would
kind of
you would
excited
you
about that.
consider would you consider moving one of your cams, one of your cameras down there to kind of have it poised there to take a look at some of the stuff over there?
Yeah, and I am actually thinking about that. So I still have my cameras in the woods from this past year. So I haven't. Generally speaking, I'll put them in this instance. I put them in July, and I'll usually keep them in all the way through season. Take them down sometime in that January February time frame. But this time, I think what I'm gonna do when I take them down, I haven't taken them out yet, is I'm gonna take one of the cameras and just bring it right back there right now in January, February, probably change out the batteries and just set it up and let it run for the
Yeah.
whole year. Because the area, once it grows up this summer, it's going to be so
Mm.
hard to get back there. It was a challenge with like no leaves on the trees and stuff like that. Trying to get in there in like the middle of summer is going to be like
Right.
downright impossible. So
Yeah.
I think I'm going to put it in before the summer, and that way I'll be able to, pull that card next year and get some good
Yeah.
information.
Hmm. No, that totally makes sense. And yeah, that's gosh, there's just so many similarities between like the hunting and the fishing world, and just the patience that it takes, but also like that aspect you're talking on and on about like something that you're so passionate about, and the different like directions of wind, and the different things that you're trying to utilize in terms of like this chess game almost that you're playing with the deer that are in the woods. But at the end of the day, like if you think about how much wood there is, like just how much like coverage there is, and the fact that you need to be in the right spot at the right time when the deer is passing by, and like all the factors that need to align perfectly in order for you to be able to get yourself a shot at a deer, like it's the odds are just so stacked astronomically high. And like you were saying before, like on that day where the sign was perfect and the temperature was perfect and the wind was perfect, and maybe that deer just decided to turn right instead of left to go to
Exactly.
that other tree that they had been rubbing versus the one that you had been scouting. Like it, there's just so much that can go wrong, and so much that needs to go right in order for you to be able to get your shot.
Exactly.
So it's but you don't do it. It's kind of like we talk about in the teaching world. Like you don't get into teaching to like for the money. I feel like you don't get into hunting or fishing for that matter because you're looking to like fill your wall with
Yeah.
with all of the, or at least at the very least you need to be willing to not fill your wall
Right.
with
Exactly.
lots of racks in order to for it to be something that you enjoy. And I think that it's something that's kind of like a lifelong passion, and you're putting the grunt work in on the front end, and it'll end up paying off, but
Yeah.
not in the form of any venison burgers that you were able
Well,
to
not
enjoy
this
this
year,
year.
unfortunately.
Yeah, you
But
might
yeah.
still have some in your freezer from the previous year,
Nah,
but
yeah. No, I think we I think
none
we
this year.
finished it all off, unfortunately. But
Finally
it
polished
was
off
good.
yeah.
But that's my hunting season. I'm really eager to
Yeah.
hear what your fishing season was like this year, Mike.
Yeah, so it's funny that you were talking about your six different sits, because I have kind of broken up over the course of the seasons, over the course of the year. Now, again, when things get a little bit colder, you can go fishing down here, but it's just it doesn't have anything to do with as much the fish as much as it does. That has a little bit to do with the fish, but more it's just kind of like the comfort level of not wanting to be out on the open water when it gets particularly cold. So I have kind of like like two things, which amounts to now I know I'm an English teacher, not a math teacher here, but 2 times 3 is 6. So I've got kind of like my 6 things to kind of mention here over the course of those 3 seasons. So I'll bring you through kind of the spring season, the summer season, and then the fall season. The summer season, where I do far and beyond kind of the most of my fishing, being a teacher and getting the summers where we get to spend a little bit more time with family, get a little bit more time, and it's especially with my wife's family that has a lake house up on Lake Kiwi, is where I do a lot of quite a bit of fishing during the summer. But living in kind of like the North Georgia area, and living north of the city of Atlanta, I'm probably about 45 minutes or so from Lake Lanier. And Lake Lanier is where I've started doing quite a bit more fishing. It's a place where a couple of years ago I had. Um, 2 years ago, I had taken some personal days, and that's where a lot of my spring fishing comes from. I have to take personal days off of work. Now, fortunately, over the course of the year, I tend to not take more than is necessary. So I have kind of this like this stockpile of some of these personal days where if I don't use them, they end up dissolving at the end of the year. So I can't carry over. You can carry over sick days, but not you can't carry over personal days. So I end up going out like the last couple of the weeks of the school year, when we're getting into kind of like May or so, later May, maybe sometimes even in like the first week of June. If I haven't taken my personal days, I take them to go fishing because otherwise I'm going to lose them. So the previous year, it was kind of like rainy, which I love that you were talking a little bit about the rain and the fact that it's actually not necessarily a bad thing for hunting. Certainly with fishing, there's a lot of advantages to the rain if you can tolerate it.
Hmm.
Now, when the rain gets to be more of a deluge, which it did on this day a couple of years ago, it kind of like it gets to the point of diminishing returns when you can't really like reel in comfortably,
Yeah.
and you're spending hours out there trying to catch a fish, and it's just not worth it. But the a couple of that 2 year ago trip that I took up to Lake Lanier was on a personal day. I wasn't because I needed to. It was my schedule wasn't perfect. I needed to like bring the kids into school because of like a meeting. Now I'm looking at the end of my schedule trying to find the perfect personal day that I can be taking, and it didn't wind up being perfect. I needed to bring the kids in at like 7:45, so I'm not actually getting up to the lake. I'd love to be getting onto the lake at like 6 o'clock or
Yeah.
6:30. I'm not getting onto the lake until 8:30, and at that point, like if it was in the summer and I'm like really trying to get out to do the majority of my fishing, like at 8:30, like the day's already gone
Hmm.
at that point. Most days in the summer, uh, in a lot of ways, because I want to be able to come back and help out my wife with the kids with like breakfast and stuff. Like my fishing day is done by 8:30. I'll try and get out on the and I'll talk more about this in the summer, but when I get to the summer section, but I want to get out on the lake at 6, and I
Yeah.
wasn't getting out this for the 2 years ago again until like 8:30. So this year was a little bit more advantageous. It didn't have that like drizzly weather, which is perfect. It was actually a little bit warm, but the time of day I was able to get out there probably closer to like 7:30 or
That's
so.
not too bad.
I didn't get quite the jump that I wanted to, and I had some trouble getting the like all of my equipment and stuff ready as I was trying to like get out the door. So still not bad, but definitely later than I wanted to. That previous time I mentioned it because the place where I was parking was $25, and so I found a spot that was $5 that had like a very similar access point. So I was like,
Nice.
jackpot!
Yeah, it is a
This is
jackpot.
the part of the lake that I want to fish, and now I've got a $5 in instead of a $25 in.
That's
Great.
great.
So I put in, and I'll talk a lot about kind of like the difference between casting and retrieving and trolling. Trolling, you have like the line. Typically, you want it out back behind you, like 2.5 first downs. So you're looking at, I do everything like football coach. It's like 25 yards, like 2.5 first downs is like kind of like the sweet spot that you want the line behind you. And I won't talk a ton about equipment, but I do have a like a Rapala. I do a lot of fishing with like fake minnows, and so they'll have like a couple of tri hooks that are off the back. I like fishing because I do so much casting and retrieving, and I do quite a bit of trolling as well. I like those that dive down a little bit deeper
Mm.
because if I can get it like 25 yards back behind my kayak. I'm paddling out there in a kayak. I don't have a motorboat, but I'll be kind of like paddling it. But Now, I will say that paddling with the kayak does let me go like pretty perfectly at like 2.5 miles an hour, which I think is like the perfect sweet spot
And
for
it
trolling.
gives you like a little bit of like an uneven pace
It
too, which
does.
gives you like a little bit of
It
like a crawl motion for that lure too.
Yes,
So
it
I think
does,
that
and
might be
every little bit
advantageous.
that you can give that makes it seem like not quite like perfect like symmetry in the movement of that lure like it goes a long way. And one of the lures that I have has like this really deep diving nose, and so when I'm paddling, like it'll kind of like dip a little bit, and then it'll rise, and then it'll dip, and because my paddling isn't perfectly even, I'm convinced that it ends up catching a little bit more fish. So yeah, I started off kind of trolling, mostly casting and retrieving, and there were a few spots that I was downright sure they were going to have fish. I mean, they had what I'm looking for, and I know that I'll kind of parlay this into a little bit of kind of like one of my questions, if we even have time for it, Pat, at the like towards the end here. But I'm looking for when I'm looking at like a fishing spot, I'm looking for a spot where it goes from being in like an open part of a lake, so like a wide kind of like a berth where there's a lot of fish that are in, granted, a very spacious area, that's going down probably anywhere from like we want anywhere from like 30 feet or so down to like some points of Lake Lanier get deeper than Lake Kiwi.
Oh wow.
But 30 feet is kind of like the sweet spot. It might go down to like 40, 50 in some spots that are a little bit deeper. Not much deeper than that though. But I'm looking for like a wide spot in a open part of the lake that ends up coming to a front at like a point where there's a really steep drop off. And
Hmm.
the reason for that is because and like a natural like steep drop off right at that point. Because what that means is that there's kind of, you're talking about that bottleneck.
Hmm.
There's kind of like this funneling that ends up happening with all of these fish as they're making their way through their different kind of like currents, and the currents will shift around a little bit, but for the most part the fish are kind of like making their way through the lake, and it might not be the same fish, but fish,
Yeah.
speaking plural, will be making their way through the lake in kind of like this generally speaking, kind of like the same currents and the same pattern. So if you can locate a spot where you get some of that bottlenecking, if you can locate a spot where you get a lot of those fish that are kind of like when they get pressed up against a wall, not just like two-dimensionally up against like the wall that's there, but also in terms of the elevation, you're going from 30, all of a sudden you're at 10, all of a sudden you're at 5 feet.
Hmm.
Now things are like really, the fish are trying to feed in those areas, and so when you're fishing with a lure that is imitating like a small one of these minnows, a small one of these fish, you want to be putting that lure where the fish are eating.
Yeah.
And so the fish are eating at spots where there's this bottlenecking that's happening because the elevation is going so drastically from this wide current of all of these fish being around up until all of a sudden the fish is being eaten at 5 feet because there's nowhere left for
Nowhere to
them to
go.
go. So I find myself wanting to cast and retrieve a lot of times into those points where this bottlenecking is happening, and I found a great deal of success like kind of looking out for those spots. So I found this absolutely perfect spot this last year, this past spring, and there was some jumping that was going around, but I wasn't getting any bites. Now, I do listen to a lot of podcasts and stuff. I was listening to Kitchen Confidential for the required reading podcast. We did that episode back in the spring, so I was still having a great time. But there weren't any bites, and I was getting a little bit frustrated because there was a little bit of jumping, which is kind of like the only sign really that you can
Yeah.
get of fish because they're all underwater.
Hmm.
So the only times that you really get like any sort of quote sign is when they're surfacing. So I was listening to my podcast, still having a good time, but I kept my eye on this spot that was like a 50-foot or so in terms of kind of like square area plateau that was within like eye shot of my car that was parked like right over on like on the beach area
Hmm.
that's kind of like very short distance away. Now, this plateau has like signs that are warning signs for boats that are coming by, which in a kayak, like that's my spot because the boats can't get there. And
Right.
so I can kind of like perch myself in this spot that is 50 feet wide that has like as shallow as like 6 feet. Now
Wow.
remember, I have a very deep diving lure, so I have to be careful because I have to keep that thing going and can't let it sink all that much. Otherwise, it's going to end up getting like caught in the
Mm-hmm.
reeds. But if you can differentiate between kind of like getting caught in the reeds, there's a lot of fish that are there because similarly, it's out in the open part of the lake, and so there's this huge bottlenecking that's happening, and these fish are just jumping all over this plateau. And I know it, but there's a fisherman who's in a boat who's like casting into this like jumping mess, and it's where I want to be. I'm looking
Right.
over there, like the grass that is so much greener, and I'm of course I'm like there should be fish over here at this point, and there's not, and I'm seeing this guy who's reeling in all of these fish off this point. And it's like, gosh, if I could just be over there. The fisherman finally left,
Mm-hmm.
and so I ended up paddling my way in, and there is kind of like a similar approach. You don't want to, like, the way that you end up coming in, you don't want to be splashing about or anything like that,
Okay.
and you get like you get a couple of casts when you're first getting in there before they might either identify the kayak, the fish might either
Mm-hmm.
identify the kayak, or they might kind of like see some of the splashing as you're trying to make your way in. You get a couple of casts where it's just the lure that's in there, and in that spot I caught, within 45 minutes I caught 3 fish. So it was like every like 5 to 10 casts
Yeah.
I was catching a fish, or I was getting a lure caught on the bottom. So I probably lost 3 or 4 lures as I'm catching these fish, but
Yeah.
I ended up catching 3 fish over the course of that time span. So like I fell in love with this spot, and of course it's like it's within eyesight of of my car being parked there. If I had just been able to like get into this spot, now that this fisherman was there for quite some time, and then he left, somebody else came in the meantime, so I wasn't able to
Yeah.
get there as soon as. And but at the time, this is my new spot, so I didn't even know about it, and so I kind of kept my eye on it, and then I ended up boating 3 fish, which was great. I took pictures of them, and I unless it's the summer and I know that I'm going to be cooking a lot of fish, which I'll get into in the summer. I tend to it's just catch and release for the most part.
Yeah.
Unless I catch something that I'm like, all right, this is big enough to be able to feed like me and the family, and like I'll fry it up tonight. I have found that if I put it in the freezer and don't like fillet it and cook it that night, it doesn't get eaten,
Mm-hmm.
it ends up getting wasted. So I try not to do that. But anyways, I had a second personal day that I didn't want to lose, and so I went back. This time I was an hour earlier, and so I was eager to fish in that plateau spot. I was so eager, in fact, when I got there. I got there an hour earlier, so I'm looking at like 6:30, 6:45 or so. I was so eager. I was at the time fishing in this like inflatable kayak that I can like pump up with the air pump. And so there I am. I'm super eager. The plateau's open. So I'm like pumping this thing up. I was so eager I forgot to put the rudder on the bottom
Oh
of my
no.
kayak. And so there I am, like trying to paddle. I'm like, something doesn't seem right. And I'm trying to paddle. I'm getting like pushed around by the currents and by the wind. And I'm just like, I forgot the damn rudder. I forgot the rudder in the car. I was so excited to get out there. And so but I didn't want to be like outdone. So I tried to like paddle myself in there. I got about halfway to this plateau, and I'm like, it's not working. And I didn't want to have to be out there and then end up like not being able to control my
Yeah.
casts and being frustrated by that. So I ended up trolling my way back to the car, and in order to get the rudder, which I had just left in the car. So while I'm trolling back, I ended up catching a small fish. It was less than a foot.
Mm-hmm.
It was probably maybe like 10 inches, like 9 to 10 inches. It was a small fish, but I was like, hey, I've had a little bit of luck. As I'm putting the rudder onto the kayak, this guy shows up in a like shallow bottomed boat, and he puts himself right on the edge of the
Oh
plateau that I
no.
wanted to be fishing. So I'm watching all this happen. As I'm putting the rudder onto my kayak, I'm watching this guy pull into the spot. I'm like, damn it. And so I'm of the impression, and this is like I'm a little bit more clear sighted with it now, but I'm of the impression that's like, listen, bud, you've got a boat, you've got a motor on the back of your boat, you can go anywhere you want. Like, I'm so limited in where it is that I can go. So there I am getting frustrated. I'm huffing and puffing as I'm like paddling my kayak around, doing like swearing to myself as I'm like doing circles around this plateau, just saying to myself, like, if I can just catch one trolling like right in this guy's face. And of course he's reeling in fish as he's doing this.
Yep.
But he was there for like 2.5 hours. And
Oh.
so there I am, like it was an older guy that was there. He's there with his wife, and I'm just like, I can't be mad at this guy, but at the same time, I'm so mad at this guy.
Right.
But I was like, you know what? Fine, I'll fish a different part of the lake. I do have some kind of like availability. I'm in a kayak. I can paddle around. I like trolling. I've seen over the years quite a bit of success trolling, and so I kind of was making my way out of the plateau, and I ended up catching one trolling when I must have been probably like 20 feet from this guy's boat as I like ended up reeling this one in. And I didn't want to be a jerk about it, but like I reeled this in, like took a picture of it, put it back in. And I did see that he was looking over at me there. But I was proud of the fact that he did see at least the fact that like, oh, you might have the boat, but I got the fish.
Exactly.
But anyways, I ended up kind of paddling along the coast. And again, there's this like there's downed trees. I should have had more luck in kind of like along this long coast that kind of like keeps that plateau in mind, in kind of like in sight. But I didn't have any luck there. Came back through and fished the plateau again, and I didn't get anything kind of when I came back through. And this is like the spot that I had caught three within 45 minutes.
Yeah.
And so I kind of like I was ready to be done with just the two, kind of that smaller one that I caught on the way back to get my rudder, and then the other one that I caught kind of like in this guy's face. And then when I was trolling back to the beach, I ended up actually catching another one, and that was the biggest of them. It was probably like 13 inches or so,
Nice.
so just over a foot. It's a good sized fish. My father-in-law likes to say it's good eating size.
Yeah.
They tend to be pretty good at that size. So
What kind of fish were these that you were catching here?
so spotted bass, good question. Well, spotted bass, the first one, nope, all three of those were spotted bass, and those are far and beyond the most frequent. Little known fact: they're not actually called spotted bass because of like the line of spots that are across their belly. A lot of people think that it is, but it's actually they got a spot on the tongue.
Huh.
So that's why it is that they're called spotted bass. They are, in my opinion, and I know that I'm jaded because it's the fish that I've caught the most, but they're the most fun to catch. And I've looked at a couple of different things online about like different fish that are in kind of like the Georgia waters, and
Hmm.
I love spotted bass because, especially for casting and retrieving, and a little bit for trolling, but especially for casting and retrieving. Man, they are so fun. They put up a good fight for their size,
Hmm.
and they're not gonna like chomp your line, and they put up a really good fight for their size. So they're the most fun to be casting and retrieving because when they hit, excuse me, when they hit the line, you know it.
Yeah.
And so you get that like that awesome sensation when you're casting it, it ends up hitting your line. It's just like there's no feeling that's better than it. And they put up a good fight, and they're rewarding too. A lot of these fish they'll run anything. You'll catch them, especially with these lures. You'll catch them as small as like 8 inches, and they'll run. You'll catch a good one at like 18 inches. I mean, they're rarely, especially in Lake Lanier and in Lake Kiwi, they'll run you like 18, 19 inches is some of the bigger ones that I've caught. Now, I'm sure that there are people that are fishing Lake Kiwi and Lake Lanier that are catching like monsters that are spotted bass, but those are the like things that are over 2 feet long. That's kind of like and again, my father-in-law is saying that like that 13 to 17 inches, it's really good eating size, and they put up a really good fight, and they're good. They're good to take the picture of before catching and releasing. And if most of what you're doing is catching and releasing anyways, I mean, there's nothing really better than spotted bass. So
Yeah,
yeah,
absolutely.
great question. But yeah, that kind of puts a cap on the spring season. When it comes to summer, we spend 3 weeks at the lake house, up at my wife's family's lake house, and I probably went out about 10 mornings. Now I will say that our 3-year-old's been giving us some rough sleep to begin with, and so I couldn't count on being able to like know that I was going to be getting good sleep. But when I'm up there at the lake house, like I want to be trying if I can to make the most of that time because it's when I get the most of my fishing in. So I'll try if I can to go out every other day. Sometimes that turns into every three, but it made for probably about 10 mornings that I was able to go. I fish because I'm in a kayak, and it used to be a canoe. The family lake house has a canoe. I do a lot more in kayaks now. I bought a couple of inflatable ones before they all got holes punctured in them. So this fall I ended up getting myself a uh, kind of composite kayak that I love. It doesn't quite fit in the car, so it has to go on the roof with some straps, which has
Hey,
been
that works though, as long as it
an
gets you there.
interesting endeavor. It's very nice being able to not have something that could end up. The I rarely run into instances of like being out on the water and a patch that I've put on it like leaking or something like that, but it is very infuriating when I'm trying to like pump air into the kayak and it's just like, damn thing's got another puncture hole. I can't take it out this morning. I'm there like perfectly
Yep.
6 o'clock in the morning, sun isn't up yet. There I go to pump up the kayak and there's a hole in it. It's just like, damn it, I can't take this out now. So it had gotten a little bit frustrating, but as a result of taking the kayak and canoe out as often as I did, my father-in-law has renamed the point that's kind of like, oh gosh, it's got to be 150 yards or so from kind of like where the lake house is. It goes out to a point. And it's been renamed Mike's Point because it's where I do so much of my fishing. There's a far point that a lot of fishermen will kind of put themselves around. That's a long peninsula, and all around it for probably I would guess 20 to 30 feet in all. Probably even further than that. It's got to be closer to like maybe 25 or 30 yards pushed out from this plateau. Or pushed out from this peninsula, there's like a plateau that goes out in all directions. So if
Mhm.
you can imagine what I was talking about before, this bottlenecking, it all happens right at that plateau. So and that's a little bit of a further paddle. It's probably closer to like three. No, it's probably closer to like a quarter of a mile by the time you're all the way out there. It's just a lengthier paddle,
Mhm.
and as you're paddling across, it's kind of like a fishing dead zone.
Yeah.
So in order to get to Mike's Point, I'm trolling along a coast, which I very oftentimes will either see fish jumping or I'll be catching them along the way to Mike's Point. And so the kind of across the way that plateau, it's very appealing when you get there, but I'm losing valuable fishing time in order to
Mhm.
try and get there. Um, Catherine's Cove, which is where Catherine and a lot of her siblings learned to water ski, is kind of like right along the point from Mike's Point. So if you kind of like follow our peninsula along all the way around that point, all the way to the other edge, it goes into this cove where there are these like fishing spots that have some overhanging trees, and
Nice.
then there's like a farmhouse ridge. There's a farmhouse that's kind of like halfway to like an overhanging bridge, which is actually where I caught my first fish on Lake Kiwi. This is in my father-in-law's fishing boat. This was probably like 10, 11 years ago. But it's like down to a ridge that's a mile from the like a mile across the water from the lake house. But there's this like farmhouse ridge that's along there that I do a lot of trolling along as well. So most often I want to be getting out at 6 a.m. When I'm later, I tell myself that that's the reason that I'm not catching fish.
Yeah.
It's more of a mental game than anything else. But if I'm not able to get out there at 6 a.m., it's like I'm telling myself that's the reason why. But I'll listen to a lot of podcasts and audiobooks and stuff as I'm fishing, so it's appealing. Some mornings I'm catching maybe three, never really more than that, and that's when I'm out there probably from 6 o'clock until like 9 o'clock would be a longer stint. Sometimes I'm just catching one, and maybe a third to half the time I'm not catching any. So there are a lot of mornings that I'm going out there even when conditions are great, and it's the most frustrating when they're jumping all around, and I'm still not catching anything. Those are the times where I'm pushing 3 hours being out there, 3.5, 4 hours, and I'm just like, gosh, they're jumping. Like, how can I not catch anything? And that's when I start to get into my own head, kind of like you were talking about before. But I'm doing casting and retrieving and trolling all around those kind of like four different points in a cycle, and that's been I prefer casting and retrieving just because of that sensation when that fish hits the
Mhm.
line. But trolling, I've been catching a lot more fish that way, kind of like making my way from one spot to the other. Um, halfway through the summer, my kayak sprung an unsealable leak,
Oh no.
and so I started taking the canoe out, which is way heavier. It's way more cumbersome. It's just more of a load to kind of like get in and out of the water. But my father-in-law does a lot of kind of like trolling with the grandkids, and so I over the course of the time would kind of like elbow my way onto the boat, or like if I was getting myself out to like take the canoe out, and my father-in-law wanted to take the boat out, he'll oftentimes kind of like I think feel bad for me sometimes and be like, not going to make you paddle. We're gonna actually take the fishing boat out. So I caught probably between 10 to 15 throughout those kind of like 3 weeks during those sessions. Now,
Nice.
the third lake, and that's all at Lake Kiwi. The third lake that I fish is Lake Hartwell. And that's once a year. I go to Lake Hartwell. I might try and get up there a little bit earlier. It means waking up earlier because from where I am, it's probably an hour and a half to get up there. Maybe an hour 15, maybe even as little as an hour. But Lake Hartwell is a much deeper lake,
Hmm.
and you can catch some bigger fish there. And so every year we take like a guided trip with a guide, that is I'll name him here because he's awesome and he's done such great work. Steve was Fish Ski Business, kind of like risky business but for fish,
There you go.
and he is sensational. And when we go out, we'll like everybody that's on this trip, and normally it's me and one of the other uncles and a couple of the grandkids along with my father-in-law. Everybody is catching double-digit fish,
That's
and
awesome.
a lot of these fish are like pushing 2 feet, and a lot of them aren't necessarily. There are some that'll be closer to that kind of like 15-inch long like point, but the fish are just bigger, and the guide brings us to spots that are better because the lake's deeper. It's twice as deep as like Kiwi is twice as deep. Not quite as deep, not quite twice as Lanier, but it's but there we're fishing with live bait and we're
Hmm.
putting down lines down for the most part. And so I mean, this guide he's watching storks, he's watching osprey to see kind of like where it is that they are, and he's got this stick, and he's like a shaman. He's like tapping the boat's hull in order to try and like bring the fish, like to the attention as they're feeding. And he's even able to like as he's walking along the boat like this maestro, he's able to like predict. He's like grab that line, there's going to be a fish on it. There's not even a fish on the line, but it's like there's going to be a fish on that line, and we're like what, and we go and grab the line. By the time we get there, that line is down and we're catching a fish. I mean,
Wow.
he is like a magician. It's unbelievable. Now he makes a killing because he goes out there, he's running these trips all year long, and he's extremely good at what it is that he does. But we'll put the down lines like anywhere from 20 to 50 feet. There, it's a lot of striper and hybrid bass, some spotted bass, and we like keeping. My father-in-law likes eating the spotted bass. He thinks that they taste the best. I like striper. I like hybrid. I'm not picky. I love fish. So I could when I'm there. I mean, I could eat fish like every day. Shouldn't be eating like fish every day, but I feel like I could. But we'll take probably about maybe as many as six. I always want to take more than than my father-in-law wants to take. But yeah, we'll take as many as six home, and between the like two different parts of the fillet, then cut in half. Between the six fish, we're able to feed 18 to 20 people with just the six fish. So I mean,
Wow.
these fish are that we take the bigger ones so that we can feed more people, but we're feeding a lot of people. And I mean, these fish, they're just huge that we're pulling out of this lake. And at the same time though, and I know I've talked with you about this, Pat, like I miss the casting and retrieving aspect
Mm.
of it. You know, like we have a guide that's bringing us, and of course I'm boating these huge fish, these like trophy fish, and we're getting these awesome pictures, and the grandkids are just like in like another
Hmm.
realm. They're enjoying themselves so much. But I miss the casting and retrieving, and I miss being in charge of my kayak and being able to like find the spot, find the fishing hole, and be like, yeah, that's gonna be the spot where I'm gonna catch some
No,
fish. Uh,
absolutely. I think that kind of comes down. I mean, there's a lot of similarities there to like hunting, right? I mean, obviously, bow hunting versus rifle hunting. You're talking with a rifle, you have, depending on what you're utilizing, you have an effective range of a quarter mile, right?
Right.
If you have open area and, good
Hmm.
wind and, everything is the right conditions. With a bow, I mean, you're talking, yeah, sure, you could take an 80-yard shot with a bow, but I mean, that's like
Yeah.
max. You're
Hmm.
really looking at inside of 20. And if we're talking about trying to find a spot where you can get a deer to walk inside of 20 yards, I mean, there's a lot of challenges that are associated with that. And you have to figure out what
Yeah.
tree you're going to be in. And, that's part of the fun, right? Figuring out
Right.
the spot, figuring out the tree, figuring out the pinch point where these fish are going to be feeding, right? That's the fun part,
Yeah.
not
Hmm.
necessarily just putting the fish in the boat. So it all kind of makes sense there.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that kind of like moving into the last kind of like season here, I kind of like used a lot of that. And like it's funny, you would think that like fishing as often as I was during those days, like you might kind of like lose the knack for it, but like it only just like fuels my fire. So I came back after having my kayak was like in the kayak graveyard. And I say that because I think that I got like three of these inflatable kayaks because they were on sale because they keep getting these punctures in them. So like I returned like back to for fall fishing. And again, I need to take the personal days in order to do it, or try and find kind of like a weekend day where I'm able to kind of like make it
Hmm.
happen. And I had a little bit of extra like spending money at the end of having run a lucrative swim camp at the end of at the end of the season. And I had said to my wife that I wanted to like I knew what I wanted to spend my money on. I wanted to buy a kayak, wanted to buy some new fishing gear, get some straps so that I can put it on the car without having to use like ropes on the top of my car. And so I went out and got the gear, and I was so inspired to go after the summer to get back onto Lake Lanier into some of these spots that I had been scouting where it's like I just know I'm going to catch all these fish. So um, I I was at the time I came close to building a canoe. I didn't do that. More to come in future episodes for if I end up
Yeah,
endeavoring down
excited to
that
hear
road.
about that.
Uh, yeah, yeah, I had the plans up. I even like went to Home Depot to take a look at products and stuff, and I ended up instead buying a brand new kayak. I got an 8 foot kayak, which is like manageable on the water, and also in the garage,
Hmm.
which is both very good. I got myself like a fish finder that kind of trails off the back of the boat. I got myself an aerator. I got myself a new pole so that I could have two working concurrently with one another. I got myself a cooler to be able to keep my live bait. I bought live bait from a live bait shop. I like went and located a live bait shop. I had trolling hookups for like the side of my kayaks that I could be casting and retrieving with one while I'm paddling and trolling with the other without having to like make too many adjustments to it. I have a summer birthday, and my father-in-law got me 5 of the lures that I like. So I'm
Oh,
I'm
nice.
flush with the lures that I like. I was so ready to go. I even went to this like bait shop that I had kind of like scouted out, and I didn't end up getting any of the like the lures or gear or anything that was there. But I saw a hat, I saw a beanie, and while I was there getting my live bait, I was like, if I catch a fish during this fish, like even just one, I'm coming back here and I'm gonna buy that beanie. And so there I am. I'm on the like I get to at this point. I wanted to try a different put in that still gave me access to that plateau and to that like spot that I was convinced was gonna have fish. And so I had all of my gear, I had everything squared away. And Pat, I know you and I had watched a number of times the movie Tin Cup. But when if you're familiar enough, listeners at home, if you're familiar enough with the movie Tin Cup, you might be familiar with the moment when Kevin Costner, the character that Kevin Costner plays, gets the yips, and so he goes out to the driving range, and he has got like a helmet that looks like braces headgear. He's got like a pole like a golf club that breaks in like 6 different places, and he turns around because he's got the yips, and that's how I felt. I had all of this gear. It didn't even fit in my kayak. And I'm trying to kind of like get myself out on the water. Anyways, I get myself to the boat launch of this new. It's kind of like at a state park put in, so it's free. I in hindsight, in retrospect, I should have spent the $5 and gone where it is that I knew. But this one was closer to the bait shop, so I thought I could get on myself on the water a little bit earlier. Little did I know, there I am down at the boat launch with all of this gear. I put the kayak in, and I go to get myself into the kayak, and my pole falls into the
Oh
water and
no.
sinks down to the bottom of the lake.
Oh
Now,
god.
of course, it's only like probably at this point it's only like 3.5 feet, so I can still see the pole. So there I am. It's now like perfect fishing time, and I'm trying to use one pole in order to try and get the other pole out of the water. It's not working. So eventually I got myself down to like the shorts that I was wearing. I took off like my sweatshirt and everything. And it's it's 6 o'clock in the morning. It's in Georgia, but we're talking about like low 60s at this point. Like it's not exactly warm. And so there I am getting into the water to retrieve my pole that I had just bought like a month earlier, and I'm so excited about. Have all of this gear, and it like doesn't even fit in the kayak anymore. So had to dive into the lake in order to get my pole. As I'm trying to paddle like the live bait well that I have in my lap, I keep hitting it as I'm going. This is the first time. It's the maiden voyage for this kayak, and I can't even like paddle because my live bait well is getting in the way. The like half of the bait that I'm trying to like get on the hook, because everything is so like crammed in this kayak, I'm dropping half of the bait either into the lake or into the kayak, and the kayak doesn't have anything that keeps the anything from like falling to the back of the kayak, so I'm losing all of this live bait
Oh
to the back of the
no.
boat. It's just like this is an absolute disaster. So I ended up paddling back over to the put in, and I just left the live bait in the cooler on the beach, and I was just like, I can't do this. And so I just went back out with my tackle box and with my two poles. And I did much better once I was down to the two poles, but I still struggled with kind of like the setup of having two poles as I'm trying to troll. I told myself that it was going to be better off with the two poles, because that's just more lines in the lake, more likely you are to catch fish. But I wasn't catching anything because I kept needing to like move one from one side to the other. The lines were getting caught with one another because the kayak is so narrow and there's so little space in between them. So I really ended up doing better and this is going to be kind of like I learned moving forward.
Yeah.
I should have one for trolling and then one for casting and retrieving, and that's just got to be the way that I do it. And when I'm trolling, just leave it to just the one line, and be trolling with that. And then if I see something jump, take that line and try and hit it within 5 seconds of when that fish jumps, because if you don't hit it within 5 seconds, you lose your chance at getting the fish. But if I see something within my range that ends up popping, I'll stop trolling, or I'll just leave the line back there and I'll just pick up that pole and try and get it there as quick as I can. So I kind of learned from that. But I ended up there's a little kind of like there's kind of like twin facing points right
Mhm.
next to one another, that are probably maybe 200 yards apart. And so when I wasn't having luck at that plateau that I had like fished at before, I made my way along the coast and just made my way kind of like from one point, which if you can imagine it, it's going down from like 0 feet down to very quickly down to like 30 feet, and then kind of like being stagnant for a little while and then rising back up very quickly back up to 0 feet again.
Mhm.
So it's like a prime position. If you can put yourself going in between these 2 points, you get kind of like two chances to be able to catch fish. And it was getting to be a little bit later at this point, looking at, and I say later, probably closer to like 9:30 or so. But we're out of kind of like that main morning 6 a.m. feeding time. And so I caught one fish coming like down that bank as I was coming back up to the other one, and I reeled it in. And it was a good sized fish. It was probably a foot or a little bit
Nice.
bigger than a foot. And so I like and at this point it's like, all right, I'm getting my hat now. So this is great. So I like put that one back in the lake. And then I was like, oh, I might as well give it a shot coming back in the other direction. And so I came back down that slope, and as I'm coming back up the other side, I hit another fish. And this one was considerably bigger. This one was probably like 14, 15 inches
Oh
long.
wow.
Looking at like knocking on the door of like a foot and 4 inches or so. So it's a good sized fish, and I reeled it in. This one put up a little bit more of a fight, and I lifted it up, and I got it into the boat, got the picture of it and everything, and then it fell. and it fell into the kayak, and it slid where all the other bait were in the back of the boat.
Oh
So
no.
there I am, like, and I was like, shoot, I'm trying to like reach behind me, and I'm hearing the thing flopping around on my like in the back of my boat. It's right underneath me, and I'm like, shoot, if I can't get this thing like back into the water, like what
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to end up like keeping this thing, and I don't even have any ice to be able to
Oh
like put this
god.
fish on. So, anyways, I furiously paddled the like over a mile back to my car to try and like salvage this fish. I get back, it's dead.
Yep.
So it's like, oh my gosh. So I ended up going back to that to that bait shop. I bought my hat and I said, "Oh, by the way, I'm gonna get myself some ice from your fountain drink machine." And so I filled up 3 like extra large styrofoam cups of just ice, and I put it into my live bait cooler, which
Eh,
didn't do me any good
yeah.
that day. And then I put the fish on it, and
Oh,
I kept it in the freezer to fillet up, and
there you go.
I ended up filleting it, but this was at a time when Catherine was still pregnant
Mm.
with our now youngest, with our now 6-month-old. So I didn't end up feeding it for the family, just with fear of lake fish. You never
Yeah.
really know with pregnancies, and so there was just one more so that was the story of the hat that I actually ended up wearing up north, Pat,
Oh, nice.
for around Christmas time. But the last kind of like outing that I had was our 3-year-old wasn't sleeping all that much. There was like a week stretch where I was getting very little sleep, and so our in-laws offered to take the to take our 3-year-old. This was like 3 days before Owen was born. This was like 3 or 4 days before Owen was born. We didn't know that at the time, but we went up and we had kind of like a weekend getaway when Catherine was kind of like late in the pregnancy, and we went up to the Lanier Island resorts. Yes, this was my choice to go to the Lanier Island resorts. Yes, I did have in the back of my mind that I would love to be able to get out on the water,
That's like any out
but
good outdoorsman, right? I
yeah,
mean, don't we all
exactly,
do that?
exactly. And I told Catherine, of course, she was late in pregnancy, so it's like, if you don't feel comfortable with it, I won't go out, but I'd love to be able to get out on the water, even if it's like 5:30 in the morning. I'll be back by 9 o'clock, and I was. But like over the course of this time there, and it felt like an all-inclusive resort. They've got like restaurants right on site. There's like 3 restaurants and bars that are right alongside the pool. There's a breakfast buffet, like an arcade, water park. They've got a Margaritaville that's there, and they have boat launches. So I on one morning I had an opportunity to go out on one morning. It might have been 2 now that I'm thinking about it. I can't remember. But I found like a new spot on the lake it was just outside, and I told myself I'm not going to go to like that area that I've fished now a number of times on Lanier. I'm going to try out some new spots. And as soon as I put into the lake, it was kind of like around a bend, a really kind of like nice elongated ridge that was anywhere from like it was probably around like 15 feet or so where my lure actually was, and I wasn't out on the water for 10 minutes before I trolling to where I wanted to go and actually like do a little bit of catching and retrieving. I caught my first fish, and it was it was
Nice.
probably about a foot, so it was a nice fish that I caught there. And then I went kind of like all along these different banks and casting and retrieving, and all along these kind of like down trees and in and out of these banks. Didn't catch really anything. I was listening to the next book in the Stephen King Dark Tower series, Pat, which you and I have talked about at length. We won't get into that here, but I was listening to Wolves of the Kala. So I was listening to a podcast, and I was having a great time. Just kind of like not necessarily. I had already caught the fish, so it had been a successful day, but I wanted to catch another. And so I was kind of like making my way across kind of like a dead point in the lake. Dead point meaning that I'm not anticipating that there's no
Mhm.
ridge, there's no plateau, there's nothing that I'm like really seeing there on the fish finder in terms of elevation or fish. So I kind of like was paddling my way across, and there was this guy who was in a fishing boat who is like calling out to me. He's like, "Hey, hey!" And of course, fishing is like a very isolated kind of thing, even in very friendly North Georgia. Like
Yeah.
it's a rarity. And this guy's like, "Come on over here, come on over here." And of course, I would never do this. personally because I'm selfish and I want to be catching the fish. But he was like, he's calling me over. He's like, the fish are jumping all over the place over here. You got to make your way over here. And so I paddled my way over there. And what I should have done is I should have just trolled my way through and then casted and done some casting retrieving along the bank. But this guy got me excited. There was some camaraderie that was in the air. And so I spent probably about way more time than I should have, like 30 or 45 minutes of like prime fishing time, not kind of like going where it is that I wanted to go. And I didn't end up catching a fish, but this guy had, I mean, he was convincing enough to get me over there. So I kind of like paddled my way away there, and I was paddling my way back to where I was going to lift my kayak up and I was going to be done, satisfied with my one fish. But I caught probably the biggest fish that I had, certainly on Lanier, but of kind of like that fall season. I caught it as I was trolling on my way back. So I was excited about that, elated even, because I was like, I had put myself, I had like even paused the podcast. I was like, I'm just going to paddle my way in. I'm going to lift up the kayak and I'm going to get out of here. And that's when I caught like maybe like 15 inches or so. So it was a bigger fish along kind of like the far bank as I was trolling back. And so you finished kind of your section up, and this'll probably end up being kind of like the end of the episode, I would imagine.
I think so too. We've run our time, I feel like.
Yeah. No, but I mean, the one thing that I'll say, just kind of like end of season recap, is that I want to get it more into like doing more of the casting and retrieving more so than the trolling. Now, I'm not going to argue with like the luck that I had. I caught a lot of fish trolling, but I do prefer kind of like finding that good spot, knowing where the tree coverage is versus like where the sun's rising up. And it's all the things that you're talking about when it comes to hunting. Like I really enjoy that aspect of the fishing, of finding kind of like that little nook or that alcove that it's like, ooh, these waters are still stagnant where the rest of the waters have been a little bit more choppy. The sun hasn't hit here because there's a tree line that's keeping everything in the shade, keeping the water temperature down. So whereas the rest of the lake is at water temperature like 8:30 a.m., this is probably closer to like 6:45. This is a good spot for me to cast and retrieve. Like I love that aspect of it, and I want to, as kind of like we make our way into the spring, summer, and then next fall, I want to be kind of like making it a point to do a little bit more of that, not because of any sort of success that I was seeing or not seeing, but just because that's the aspects of fishing that I like the most. So listen, for those of you that are listening to this podcast from home, we have so much like teed up here that we were ready to talk about, and I knew that this was going to be the case, Pat. And my brother and I, Pat and I, we could talk about like stuff like this for hours on end, and we're already starting to talk about things like this for hours on end, which is really exciting for me because it's something that I'm passionate about. It's something that I know that you're passionate about. But like everything from what factors into good spots to like kind of that aspect of patience to like fishing conditions, hunting conditions, lure selections. These are the types of things where if you do continue to listen to the podcast, these are the types of things that we'll get into in next episodes and in future episodes as well. So yeah, we'll probably have to call it there, as this kind of talked about my maiden voyage of the kayak. This has been kind of the maiden voyage for the podcast, but listen, I had a ton of fun chatting with you, Pat, about some of this outdoor stuff, and hopefully whoever it is that's listening at home, hopefully you guys enjoyed it as well. So Pat, before you sign off, anything else to add?
No, I think, it was excellent to get to hear some of your fishing stories. We talk all the time, but I mean, I don't really get to hear a lot of explicitly about your fishing endeavors. And it's exciting for me to hear how excited you get, as well as for me to learn some of the, tactics that you're utilizing as well. So super excited to learn a little bit more about fishing. I do a lot of fishing, but you do a lot more than I do, so that's exciting. And as Mike was alluding to, we have a whole bunch of topics queued up here. We could probably do a whole nother podcast just with the questions we were going to ask each other after these topics. So
almost a follow-up episode.
We
so
potentially another follow-up episode. It would be
sure.
It would be a lot of fun. But yeah, I think, we've been at it for a little bit here. I think it's going to be time for us to call it for right now. So to all those at home, thank you for listening to the East Coast Hunt, Fish, Hike podcast. We'll hopefully continue to delight your ears with more fishing, hunting, and hiking stories. And until next time, try and get outside, have some fun out there, okay?
All right, awesome.
All right, thanks everybody. Thanks for listening to the East Coast Hunt, Fish, Hike podcast. If you have questions, comments, or have an idea for an episode, feel free to follow us and reach out over social media. Don't forget to rate, review, or tell your friends about the podcast. And until you hear from us again, get outside. Have some fun out there.